Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Alison Bales, and I'm very happy that we have co-screenwriter and director Debra Granik. So this is a nice audience for a Friday night. This is very respectable. Wonderful. So thank you all for coming out, and thank you, Debra, for making this film so great, so moving. I had the pleasure of talking to Ben Foster on Wednesday, just 2 days ago, about this film. And he had some really interesting things to say about how you work as a director. First of all, you worked a lot with your actors. He talked about paring down the script. Because I teased him, there's not a lot of dialogue. Some actors count lines, right, in their script to make sure they're getting, you know, a good, juicy part. Not a lot of dialogue for him, but such a great part. So can you talk a little bit about your method of how you create your characters past just the script writing process?
One of those characters is here, Derek Drescher. You have to come up. But yeah, so, and in fact, the reason this is such perfect timing is because the way that I worked with Ben is one method, which was, you know, his role was very much an adaptation from the novel, meaning this is Derek. And you saw him in the forest scenes, and so Ben did pare down his lines, and you know, it was already a terse. The father was a character that was very tersely written. And then when we added additional actions, when they got trained with the primitive skills, that enabled them to do a lot more activities. And then the words become even less frequent because they're actually exchanging things. You don't have to say, pass me that. It's passed, you know. No one has to say, I want more salt, you know, or they say just salt, you know. And so the more they're getting to know each other and the more traction they're building, then they're able to pare it down, do it with a look. Even with Tom's line, I mean, many of her lines were just a look to check her father, to see what he was doing, to just glance, just to calibrate how he was. And so that was definitely, it's mostly a film where people are doing things versus explaining things to each other.
Right.
And the sort of the other characters do that work for, like the social workers, by you know, asking them a lot of questions. They're the ones that are talking, and your heroes are sort of just answering in very minimalistic ways.
Right. Now, this is from a true story that was then turned into a novel, correct? And then you and a co-writer wrote a script. But it also flows with your work, with your oeuvre. Down to the Bone, Winter's Bone, Stray Dog, your documentary. So there's very much a continuation here, I think, of themes that you like to play with. So how did you find the story? And was it sort of like, oh, that really fits in with what I'm interested in? Was it happenstance?
Definitely not happenstance. Definitely not.
The producer is here.
Yes, yes. Ann Harrison and Linda Reisman, two producers that work, well, you're based, New York based, and Linda's in Boston, and they had loved this book for a very long time and had established a relationship with the author, and then brought the book to my attention. And when I read it, I felt that it was extremely visual, and I loved where it was set, and I knew that there would be plenty to film, you know, textures, green, tallness, patterns, lusciousness. As an East Coast person, I was like, this would be a rare opportunity to film a landscape that I'm not familiar with. And I also was filled with mystery right away. Why would these two seek out to live undetected for so long? How were they doing it? You know, what is it that they would like to separate themselves from? What will happen when they're found out? You know, the wonder was stoked, and when that combination, plenty to film, and being drawn into question, that's a good. Those are two good forces to say. This would be something very rich to attempt.
I love the fact that you just raise questions, why, how, but you don't really answer them in the film. I mean, you suggest things, we understand things, we glean information from the story, but you're not providing pat answers. I love the fact that there wasn't a love interest. I love the fact that there wasn't a villain. You know, we're just on this journey with these people, and at the end, we're in a slightly different place, but not so much of a different place. And I love that.
The lack of villain was just an odd thing that so we make the film, the regime had changed, you know, things got really darker and darker, so it was like all of a sudden it was a strange holiday this film was to have no villain, you know. Like it was just, it just kind of struck at the right time, you know, as our villains seemed to be multiplying on the sort of, you know, national scene. So that was something that we started to really appreciate about the film, that we couldn't have, going into this, it's like, oh no, lack of suspense, no violent threat, you know, no one's gonna ever, you know, no one can abide this, and then somewhere in the editing process it was like, whew, I'm so glad that people still want to help each other occasionally, you know, and it was like a couple weeks later I was like, oh, I'm hoping another character would want to help, you know, and as it went on, we got kind of excited about the idea that there could be gestures of decency.
But you're worried about a lack of suspense. I thought it was so suspenseful. I was terrified for the whole film. I was like gripped because I thought she's going to get tetanus when she cuts herself. She's going to fall off a cliff. Something awful is going to happen. And again, that was a good emotion to go along with, I think. Derek, can you tell us? So Derek is in the film, and you sort of have a story. I mean, you bring your own story to this character very much, I believe.
Yeah, at first when Debra asked me to be involved, it was just about dialogue, because I'm a veteran myself, and the issue with the prescriptions from the Veterans Affairs. You know, we went to the hospital. You know, they give you a lot of pills if you want them. You know, they're there. So I mean, it was acting, but it wasn't acting because it was a situation that I had actually been through in my life. I was on about 8 different medications from the VA for probably about 3 or 4 years, and then I, you know, didn't want to take them anymore, so I got off them. But that was very real. As far as me ever living in the woods, no. But you know, I had been a homeless veteran before. It's a very high number actually, and a lot of people think that, you know, he didn't have a home because there was an issue, you know, from when he was in the military. So it was a small part, but for me it was like, it touched on a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Sure. Well, you say there's no villain in the film, and obviously there's not a character who's a villain, but I think the film very pointedly you know, makes commentary on you know, how the vets are treated, medication, the inability for medication perhaps to help with these issues. So I think that, you know, you're not hitting us over the head with it, but the messages are there, and also this sort of crazy digital consumer age that we live in. I mean, I think that's all there in the film, and it's better because it's implicit rather than explicit. So I commend you on that.
Well, I loved your poetry. You know, when we did the improvs, and you know, I just love the line, like that's ever stopped a nightmare.
Yeah,
you know,
there was a line that was removed. And it was about the Seroquel. I don't know if anybody knows what Seroquel is.
It's worth saying right now.
So, you know, it's not really worth anything on the street. So he had the Seroquel, and I was like, you know, it's not worth anything to me unless you know somebody that wants to gain 30 pounds and sleep all day, which is,
no,
you know.
Said originally it was 70, and it was so visual.
I had gained 60 pounds myself when I was on Seroquel, so yeah. So, I mean, I wish it would have stayed in, but.
Oh no! It was hard to take that out, and it was really just a pacing thing. It was a pacing thing, you know. And
I dig it.
Yeah, and but I think one thing I would love to riff on just for a second is just what it means to take lived experience and be able to, you know, in some ways share it. It's a risk. It's a risk, you know, but it's also very firsthand intel, you know. And it was just, that was so pleasurable to have you be willing. But there's something else that I felt that Derek has really cheered up my filmmaking world a lot about, which is this beautiful statement by the French director, Laurent Contant, and he made some films that maybe some people at the Angelica, I think, might like or know. One was The Class, and he's a social realist out of France, and he puts forward this notion that for in every group of 50 people, there's at least one who will take their lived experience and be able to put words to it, and then will also, for whatever reason, neurochemistry, performative qualities, whatever it is, will be willing to sort of share that with people, you know, and could then in fact participate in a film or in a theater piece, because they have this experience, plus they have the articulateness, and then they have the sort of, I would say, courage to express it. So that's something that New York, as a New York filmmaker, the city just keeps on giving on the notion that in every group of 50 that any of us walk among in this major large population city. Just keep that in mind when you're.
I have one quick question, then we're going to offer it up to you guys, so start thinking of some questions. But when I talked to Ben on Wednesday, I asked him if he would be able to feed me, save me, protect me in the wilderness, and he said he would now after doing this film. Like, he's that well trained. Do you feel the same? I mean, the shoot to me looked like it must have been a bit miserable with all that rain and foliage and traipsing cameras into the woods and everything. Do you feel like you could survive out there now?
They did teach us a lot.
Yeah,
and
I'm sure.
And as a precipitating culture, culture they know how to protect their gear, right? It was impressive. I mean, it was not an impediment. Rain became a very. You were speaking about this the other day. Rain became for us. It was going to add to the illumination and the reflection of the forest, so that those leaves, that when she's traipsing, you see so much beautiful. Yeah. Luminous quality, and lenses love that. Lenses amplify that. Moisture on spider webs, what have you. So dripping moss. So you can't buy a rain machine that's going to wet down a forest of that magnitude. Right. So the rain was our friend. The Oregonians had no problem. We were just reminiscing about this, over the last week. They even know about like certain kinds of zippers that have a double insulation, so you don't even leak in your zipper area. They've got it down. The only person that got wet was you, because you were in like a canvas.
I rolled up and they were like already in the woods for like a month, so I was way behind them. So they had like a little tent set up for me. It was plywood, but yeah, I did get wet. Yeah,
but your costume didn't even have the waterproof qualities that everyone else had. That everyone else was afforded.
It was a long 6 hours for
being that wet. Yeah. But it was. What I'm trying to say is that this. It's kind of a pleasure thing, and that in certain states, certain crews are going to have, there must be a technique in Arizona to be able to shoot in 110. Right. They must, because they just must have that. And so this was a case where.
Well, it looked very real. You could tell it wasn't a rain machine, that's for sure. Okay, so do we have some questions?
You're clearly working in a narrative structure, but it's so well hidden that you can't really sense any artifice. So I wanted to know, is that something that you had in mind in the script stage, or is that a decision you made while filming? How did you get that natural realism?
The book that it's adapted from, My Abandonment by Peter Rock, is very much of this. It was an account of very low-key, it's a low-key story in that sense. I mean, the stakes between them are very high, but what I mean is when you look at it and where they go, there's nothing too rarefied about where they travel to. So the naturalism was in there, and then by finding locations that are live locations, like that village at the end, Squaw, the Squaw village that they go to, that's already got a vibe of people living there. People really live there. The extras in that village were the people that live there. So I think maybe what your comment makes me think about was when things look like they're being actively used, that they're real places with real people in them, versus any kind of set, or versus, I want to say, even very, very, maybe also the lack of words, that when there are long exchanges, you're going to feel the more the intensity of that. You understand there's a real, I want to say a repartee between people. That is probably less naturalistic than watching people observe each other. I'm just riffing here about things that make me think that that's what you're picking up on. A real 4-H club, real teens with their real rabbits. That's basically a kind of a documentary style shoot, right? Because those 15 kids, I mean, even though we triple confirm with them, it's not random. It's not like, oh, let's just go into a meeting. It was all staged, meaning the kids came on the right time, the right day. Rabbits were in place, but they're real teens from Oregon who really love 4-H. And when he gave those commands, when the 4-H coach was instructing them, they all knew exactly what he was talking about. So there was no fakery.
So it's that blending of documentary style shooting.
Exactly. Trying to use some of the techniques of documentary observation and then putting it into a narrative.
I had no idea what 4-H was, I have to say. I know I'm not from this country, but I don't know what it was.
It's on my huge list of like good things in America right now.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it exists in every state.
It does? I've lived here 30
every
years. I've
hamlet.
never come across it. I thought, whatever.
Dutchess County this year, you can see the goat barn, the cow barn. You'll see it
I
all.
gotta go check out some rabbits, obviously. I see a gentleman with the glasses and the white T-shirt.
Hi, thank you very much for making this film. It's so amazing to see it here today. I know that you immerse yourself in a lot of research prior to making your films, and would you mind sharing that with us, the amount of research that you committed to?
The research is really a very pleasurable part of the filmmaking because you go to the locations that are called out in the script or in this case the novel. So you start to meet with a ranger that is managing Forest Park. He shows you where other long-term undetected dwellers lived. He shows you some photographs of when he had, when the camps had to be abandoned or when they were discovered. Then you go on and someone from the VA is informing certain aspects of things. 3 veterans are willing to come and talk to you and inform, especially regarding the combat first aid and things that needed to be done with some precision and with firsthand knowledge. The beekeeper invites you to her backyard, and you realize that this could be a very rich part of the film, but she's also telling you things, and those are the lines that she ends up speaking. I record them. It's a little bit, I cobbled together, I guess, a lot of inspirations, but that would be almost a variation of like a Mike Leigh trope, right, where you listen to someone and then you're hearing them, you write down their words, you videotape them. And that's how I worked with Derek, and then those lines go into the script, and she's the one who's going to speak them, so she won't say it the same every time, but the research is there. She's telling me that bees fly 2 kilometers and then they need to rest, and then she's talking about all these other interesting facts about bees, and I'm thinking that would be an interesting thing for Tom to hear. That would pique her interest, and then additionally she talked about the fact that she can pretty much discern who can handle bees, who could allow them to be on, in their hands or touch them. So that was interesting to learn about that, and Tom was privy to that, Thomason, the actress, and that research period led to Tom being, just holding a little notion in her head, I'm interested in bees, and so that scene really developed because of this research process. Truckers, we needed to find out in a very big truck stop when a teen woman approaches, and you have to make a very quick assessment, like if she doesn't look like images you've seen before in this truck stop, when there's something nefarious going on or something that's really very difficult, and he had to decipher how he was going to handle that. So we had to ask quite a few different and people had different answers. Some people would say I'd walk away. Some people would say I don't want any of that. So it was interesting to hear views and then pick what would work in the scene. So the research can happen I think really on behalf of almost every scene in a project.
Another question. I hate this, having to pick, but I saw your hand go up first again. White shirt, glasses, behind the other white shirt and glasses that I just picked. Sorry.
You talked about pacing, and you did manage a strong clip in this, which I think is important in this sort of storytelling. And I'm always curious when it comes to making the final cut, if you could talk about a scene or 2 that you had to cut but were reluctant to at the last minute, and why they would have added or detracted.
Wow, because we just had to do deleted scenes actually, so for the DVD, and I have no idea if it's funny to anyone else. It remains funny to me. It was a scene that actually had some humor, and I was like, oh God, what a gem, It was a situation in which when Tom is at the shelter and the other teen are talking to her, one's out of the room, one pulls out her device, and Tom doesn't know, and the girl's explaining about, this is when, you see how this works, 100,000 people can follow this she was indicating something, and she kind of keeps flipping through images in her feed, and someone had sent her like a gross, what they called a gross slug, banana slug, which are really important in Oregon, and they're also very important as a survival skill element, because when faced with no other protein in the forest, if things have gotten very dire, they're very edible. And Nicole, the skills trainer, had taught Ben and Tom about banana slugs. So Tom was truly versed in them and knew about this very important emergency application. The other team was rampantly disgusted by the slug, and Tom points out that you can eat them, and then which the other team said, you know, maybe that's why you're here. And so and that was a riff that they did, you know, and I appreciated that so much. And I mean, there were quite a few. There was very beautiful footage in a barn. We wanted to exploit the Mr. Walters farm even more. You know, half of it was the Christmas tree operation, but the other half was this. Here we are, a film crew in an extraordinarily gorgeous barn, and we had a whole other scene in which Tom observed a horse getting sort of a therapeutic massage by a horse whisperer, and there were some really interesting lines there. That's going to be on the, you know, but it didn't fit. We were ultimately very pressed for time, right? We had to bring the time down, like almost all films do, and so these, you know, it's hard for me to use the word tangential, because for me, you know, sadly nothing's tangential, which causes a pickle. But you know, I had to say to myself, okay, this is one in which we need to move from the farm, and this is keeping us there a beat too long. So, yeah, you know, yeah, you have to be brave.
Debra, we have one more question I'd like you to choose.
Oh my goodness! I mean, let's. Yes, yeah.
My abandonment is a very different book compared to Winter's Bone. What did make you decide to pick Daniel Boudreau's book at that time, and why do you decide to adapt the Wolf's book? So
sort of what attracts me to an adaptation, or why these subject matters? The subject. So, well, there's one commonality that, of course, is evident, which is that I am drawn, not exclusively, but I will give special attention to a story that has a very active and full-bodied female protagonist. I'm searching for that kind of material, again, not exclusively, but when it's there, it will, you know, a flag will go up, like, this is good content here, this is good, this really interests me. And, you know, this story was really a dyad as well, but I think the themes in this book really interested me, as they did in Winter's Bone. So it's character, I mean, it's, you know, it's a checklist. Characters that draw me. I want to know how they're going to make it. I want to know how they're going to navigate, survive, because there's no safety net here. There was no safety net in southern Missouri Ozarks for Ree Dolly and her family, you know. Regionalism, regional filmmaking. I mean, you can't get better than that, to go to a place that has, you know, such a distinct, rich environment. Missouri Ozarks, same. Hardscrabble, intensity of what that landscape looks like. Upstate New York, you know. First film was shot there, and I felt that it was so of that place. And that was a different form, though. That was not an adaptation from a novel. That was working with a family, more like how you and I worked, you know, hearing real stories, but set in a real place, really set in a county upstate. So, you know, there's these factors that will be like a magnet to me, and that's you know, that's really, they always say, with, you know, without making it too much like hooey, you know, that frequently stories attach themselves to you. You know, you're the innocent. For whatever reason, I read like most of the scripts in Washington Square Park, and you know, then I get up from the bench and there's a sticky burr. You know, it's like on me. I like walk home and it's still there. So they attach. You can't always know why.
All right, we have to finish, but Debra seems to be keen to keep the conversation going in the lobby. Tell everyone that you know to come see the film this weekend. And Derek, Debra, thank you so much.
Thank you.